From Calvin Klein to Dior, Jungkook bows to Jimin's Paris glory. How often do we witness two titans from the same group, both global icons, capturing the world in back-to-back moments of fashion history, only to have one gracefully step aside, acknowledging the other's radiance? The spectacle is rare, almost unthinkable, yet it unfolded before our eyes as Jungkook and Jimin, two halves of BTS's golden bond, dominated the runways of New York and Paris within mere weeks. First came Jungkook at Calvin Klein's Spring-Summer 2026 showcase in New York City, where an oversized khaki suit and effortless charisma turned Manhattan into a temple of worship. Then came Jimin at Dior in Paris, his first global ambassador appearance since military service, where elegance and emotional resonance melted the internet. The story could have been one of rivalry, of two brands, one American, one French, competing for supremacy through their Korean muse. But it wasn't. Instead, it became a story of humility, of support, of Jungkook bowing, figuratively and emotionally, to Jimin's Paris glory. "Young deserves this," Jungkook said quietly during a late-night Wever session, his voice laced with sincerity. "Calvin Klein was my moment, but Dior is his world. I'm proud." In that single line, Jungkook erased the possibility of competition and elevated the narrative into one of unity, brotherhood, and shared triumph. Fashion commentators were quick to notice the poetic duality. Calvin Klein, the epitome of bold, American minimalism, found its perfect face in Jungkook, youthful, daring, rebellious, yet sleek. Dior, the pinnacle of French elegance, discovered its embodiment in Jimin, refined, graceful, magnetic, with understated sophistication. Together, the two moments did not clash but complemented one another, like chapters in a story told across continents. "This is not rivalry," wrote Vogue Korea. "It is resonance." Calvin Klein gave us power, Dior gave us poetry, and BTS gave us both. The imagery was staggering. In New York, Jungkook's khaki silhouette against flashing bulbs symbolized raw energy, a new era of K-pop's infiltration into Western fashion. In Paris, Jimin's Dior walk through the Tuileries Gardens symbolized rebirth, a phoenix moment after his military service, wings spread wide, supported by Dior's timeless artistry. And hovering above it all was Jungkook's humility, his acknowledgement that the spotlight shifts, that glory can be shared, that sometimes the most powerful gesture is stepping aside and applauding someone else's moment. Fans seized upon this narrative instantly. Social media became a battlefield of poetic edits, split screens of Jungkook in New York juxtaposed with Jimin in Paris, captions reading, "Two kings, one crown," and "From Calvin Klein to Dior, they reign together." Others highlighted Jungkook's humility as proof of BTS's unique magic. Any other industry would pit them against each other, one fan tweeted. But Jungkook bows, Jimin rises, and together they rewrite the story. American outlets, perhaps sensing the symbolic weight, contrasted the brands as metaphors for cultural dominance. Calvin Klein, a cornerstone of American casual wear, symbolized Jungkook's global reach through mainstream accessibility. Dior, deeply rooted in European haute couture, represented Jimin's ability to embody refinement and tradition while modernizing it with K-pop charisma. Both brands won. Both cultures claimed victory, but the loudest triumph was not corporate, it was human. It was Jungkook choosing not to compete but to honor. And what a Jimin? Observers noted that when he stepped onto Dior's stage, there was no sense of pressure, no shadow of competition. His every step radiated calm assurance, as though he already knew that Jungkook's words had cleared the path before him. Backstage whispers spoke of Jimin mentioning his gratitude for the group's support, a subtle reminder that glory is never solitary in BTS's universe. His Parisian moment was Dior's triumph, yes, but it was also the culmination of Jungkook's bow, the silent gift of brotherhood transformed into elegance under the Parisian night sky. As the dust settles on this historic fashion season, one question lingers. Will history remember it as Calvin Klein versus Dior, America versus France, or Jungkook versus Jimin? Or will it remember what truly mattered, that when given the chance to compete, they chose instead to complete one another? From New York to Paris, from Calvin Klein's power to Dior's poetry, the world saw not rivalry but resonance, not ego but humility, and not just fashion but the eternal truth of BTS. When one shines, the other bows, not in defeat, but in love. From the very first flash of cameras in New York, Jungkook's Calvin Klein moment was framed as history in the making. It wasn't just an oversized khaki suit draped over his frame, it was a signal. American fashion insiders whispered that this was no ordinary celebrity cameo. It was the face of a global superstar merging with the DNA of one of America's most iconic brands, and in that instant, Jungkook became the living embodiment of Calvin Klein's new era. The streets buzzed with headlines like Calvin Klein reborn through Jungkook and the idol who outshined New York Fashion Week. And yet, as dazzling as that moment was, what truly set the stage for the weeks to come wasn't just Jungkook's aura, but his humility. In his own words, delivered later in a candid Weverse Live, he redirected the spotlight towards someone else. Hyung has Dior, and Dior has him. I can't wait to see the world recognize that. That single sentence, half confession, half promise, reframed the entire conversation. Suddenly, the world was no longer waiting just for Calvin Klein's global domination. It was anticipating Jimin's Parisian rebirth. By contrast, Dior's Paris Fashion Week stage carried an entirely different energy. Where New York was raw, urban, and bold, Paris was ethereal, poised, and timeless. The Tuileries Garden became the epicenter of global fashion on October 1st, its pathways lit by the anticipation of Jimin's return. This wasn't merely another runway appearance, it was the moment. The unveiling of a global ambassador, freshly free from military service, carrying with him the expectations of millions who had waited nearly 2 years for his reemergence. And when Jimin appeared, the air shifted. French critics described it as La Renaissance d'une étoile, the rebirth of a star. Dressed in Dior's Spring-Summer 2026 vision, his presence transcended clothing. The tailored lines hugged his frame like poetry. The soft textures contrasted with his unshakable gaze, and every step seemed to echo louder than the model before or after. Dior had built a collection to dazzle, but it was Jimin who turned the showcase into history. And just as Jungkook had predicted, the world did indeed recognize it. Global media couldn't resist the comparison. American outlets framed it as a clash of symbols. Calvin Klein's new king versus Dior's crown prince. French press, however, chose a different tone, emphasizing the harmony rather than the conflict. New York gave US Jungkook's strength. Paris gives us Jimin's grace. Together, they define this generation, wrote Le Figaro. Meanwhile, Korean outlets leaned into the emotional narrative, declaring BTS the undisputed conquerors of both American and French fashion empires. Fans, naturally, took the comparisons even further. Edits flooded TikTok, splicing Jungkook striding in khaki against Jimin gliding in Dior black. Captions read like poetry: power meets grace. America met its idol, France met its muse. And the most viral one of all, from Calvin Klein to Dior, Jungkook bows, Jimin soars. That phrase alone racked up millions of views, as ARMY embraced the idea that the two were not rivals, but twin pillars of a story larger than any brand.